I was 3 time zones away when my phone buzzed at 2014 in the morning. I almost didn't answer. We'd been running drills since 0400 the day before, and my body felt like concrete. But something about seeing my aunt's number, she never called that late, not once in 32 years, made me sit up in the dark and swipe the screen. She was crying before I could say hello. "Baby, it's your mama." Her voice cracked on the last word. They hurt her. They really hurt her. I stood up so fast my head hit the bunk above mine. My roommate stirred, then went quiet when he saw my face. "What do you mean they hurt her? Who?" "The police. 2 of them came to the house about that parking thing. You know, the lot she's been fighting with the county about, and she wouldn't sign the paper. And she stopped." I heard her breathing hard, trying to hold it together. "They put her on the ground, baby. She's got a broken wrist and 2 cracked ribs. She's at Mercy General right now." I pressed my back against the wall. The room felt tilted. "Is she awake?" "She's awake. She's asking for you. Put her on." There was shuffling, then quiet, then my mother's voice, thin and papery in a way I'd never heard before. She was 61 years old, and the woman had never sounded small. Not once. Not when my father left, not when the factory closed, not when the bank tried to take the house back in 2009. She handled everything like it was just another Tuesday. She sounded small now. "I'm okay," she said. "Don't do anything stupid." That was the first thing out of her mouth. "Don't do anything stupid." "Mom, I mean it, Cody. I know how you get." "Tell me what happened." She told me. The short version: 2 officers from the Teller County Sheriff's Department had shown up at her door over a zoning dispute involving the small parking lot behind her hair salon, a piece of land she'd owned free and clear for 11 years. The county had been trying to absorb it for a redevelopment project. She'd been fighting it through proper channels for 8 months. That night, one of the deputies told her she needed to sign a voluntary relinquishment form, or they'd cite her for obstruction. She told them to get off her porch and come back with a warrant. That's when things went wrong. She said one of them grabbed her arm when she tried to close the door. She pulled back. He said she resisted. His partner stepped in. She ended up on the ground. She heard something pop in her wrist when she landed. "They were laughing," she said quietly. "When I was on the ground, one of them was laughing. I didn't say anything for a moment." "Mom, did anyone see?" "Mrs. Petworth from across the street." And she paused. I had my tablet on the kitchen counter. The camera app was open. I'd been video calling your cousin earlier. I don't know if it got anything. "Don't touch the tablet." "Cody, please, don't touch it. I'll figure this out. I love you. I'll call you in an hour." I hung up. I sat on the edge of my bunk for probably 30 seconds, staring at the floor. Then I put on my boots. My sergeant was a 16-year Army veteran named Kowalski, who had the emotional range of a filing cabinet. But when I knocked on his door at 02:30 and told him what happened, something shifted in his face. He listened without interrupting. "Your mother's in the hospital," he said when I finished. "Yes, sir. And you're telling me because you need emergency leave." "I'm telling you because I want to do this right." I looked at him straight. "If I go home without talking to you first, I might not do it right." He held my eyes for a long moment. Then he nodded, slowly, once. "Sit down." He didn't send me home that night. What he did was pull out a notepad and write 3 names on it. A military legal assistance officer on post, a civilian attorney in Knoxville who specialized in police misconduct, and a contact at the state attorney general's office he'd apparently kept since a case 7 years ago that he didn't elaborate on. He slid the paper across the desk. "You take emergency leave starting tomorrow morning. You go home, you see your mother, you get that tablet, you don't touch anything, you call these people in this order." He tapped the paper. "You do you hear me? You do not go anywhere near those 2 deputies until you've talked to someone on that list. Are we clear?" "Yes, sir." "Because I will know, Reeves. Small world." I took the paper. "How will you know?" He looked at me like it was a stupid question. "Because if you do something I have to hear about through channels, I'll know you didn't do it right. And if I don't hear anything," he leaned back, "then you did." I drove home to Harlan Falls, Tennessee in 5.5 hours. I made it by 8 in the morning, went straight to Mercy General, and spent 2 hours sitting next to my mother's bed while she slept. She looked smaller in person than she'd sounded on the phone, which I hadn't thought was possible. Her right wrist was wrapped and elevated. She had a bruise along her left cheekbone that had gone dark purple overnight. They'd taped her ribs. I sat there and watched her breathe and kept my hands very still. When she woke up, she looked at me for a second like she was confirming I was real. Then she said, "You drove too fast. Moderate speed the whole way. Liar." She tried to smile and winced. "There is a casserole in my freezer from the Pentecost ladies. Don't let it go bad." "Mom, I'm just saying." I reached over and held her good hand. "I'm going to fix this. I don't want you to get in trouble. I'm not going to get in trouble." She looked at me with that look she'd been giving me since I was about 9, the one that meant she knew exactly what I was thinking and was deciding whether to argue about it. Then she sighed and squeezed my fingers. The tablet's on the kitchen counter. I left it exactly where it was. The tablet had gotten 26 minutes of video. The angle wasn't perfect. It was facing the front door at a diagonal from the kitchen counter, maybe 15 feet away. But the door had a glass panel, and the porch light was on, and the whole thing was clear enough. You could see both deputies. You could hear the conversation. You could see my mother try to close the door. You could see the taller one, younger, maybe late 20s, a jaw like a block of wood, grab her arm. You could see the moment she went down. And in the 3 seconds right after she hit the floor before they apparently remembered they were on a call, you could see the shorter one put his hand over his mouth. Not in horror. His shoulders were shaking. He thought it was funny. I watched it 4 times. Then I called the attorney in Knoxville. Her name was Beverly Okafor, and she'd been doing civil rights litigation for 19 years. She answered on the second ring at 9:15 on a Wednesday morning and listened to my summary without once interrupting me. When I finished, she said, "The tablet footage, you haven't uploaded it anywhere, posted it, or shown it to anyone?" "No, ma'am. Just watched it myself." "Good. Don't. Preserve the device. I want a forensic copy made before anything else happens to that tablet. There's a company in Knoxville I use. I'll text you their number. Can you get there today?" "I can get there today." "Then do that first. I'll meet you at my office at 2 o'clock. Beverly Okafor was a small woman in her mid-50s who wore reading glasses on a beaded chain and talked like every word cost her something, and she was being careful not to overspend. Her office had floor-to-ceiling bookshelves and a single photograph on the wall. Her, 20 years younger, shaking hands with someone in front of a courthouse. She never explained who it was. She watched the tablet video twice, taking notes. Then she took off her glasses and set them on the desk. The taller one is Deputy Fitch. The shorter one is Deputy Harlan. Yes, same name as the town. I know, it's not relevant. Fitch has 2 prior conduct complaints on record, both dismissed internally. Harlan has one, also dismissed. She folded her hands. This video changes the nature of those prior complaints significantly. How so? Because a pattern of behavior is legally different from an isolated incident. Fitch didn't grab your mother because he lost his temper in the moment. If we can establish that this kind of conduct has happened before and been protected internally, she paused, we're not just looking at individual liability anymore, we're looking at systemic failure. The sheriff's department. Possibly the county. I thought about the zoning dispute, about the redevelopment project, about who stood to benefit. Beverly, the land they wanted her to sign over, who owns the development project? She held my gaze. That's a good question. It took her about 4 days to get the answer, and when she did, she called me at 7 in the evening and said, "You need to come back to my office. The Harlan Falls East Side Redevelopment Initiative, the project that needed my mother's parking lot, was administered by a nonprofit called Community Forward Teller County. The registered agent for that nonprofit was a man named Spurgeon, as in Deputy Harlan's uncle, as in the man who had personally recommended both Fitch and Harlan for their positions 2 years ago. According to county employment records, Beverly had obtained through a public records request. It's not a coincidence, I said. No, she said. It is not. I want to be honest about something. There was a version of this story where I drove to Fitch's apartment complex and did something I couldn't take back. I knew where he lived. I'd found out by the second day home, without really meaning to. Small town, 6 degrees, someone's cousin works dispatch. I drove past the building just once, at 11 at night, and sat in the parking lot for maybe 4 minutes. Then I drove away, not because I was afraid of what would happen to me. I wasn't, particularly, because I kept hearing my sergeant's voice. You do not go anywhere near those deputies until you've talked to someone on that list. And underneath that, my mother's, I know how you get. I thought about her on the floor of her own porch, a wrist she'd broken 20 years ago re-broken in the same place, and the man laughing at her. And I thought the worst thing I could do to Fitch right now is nothing, because Beverly was building something they couldn't laugh off. So I drove away. The Tennessee Bureau of Investigation opened a formal inquiry 6 weeks after I came home. Beverly had filed the civil suit within the first 2 weeks. Excessive force, civil rights violations, conspiracy to deprive property rights under color of law. The complaint named Fitch, Harlan, the Sheriff's Department, Spurgeon personally, and Community Forward Teller County as a civil co-defendant. She'd also sent the forensic copy of the tablet footage to the State Attorney General's office through the contact on Kowalski's list, along with a 40-page summary of prior conduct records, the nonprofit's financial filings, and a timeline connecting Spurgeon's recommendation of both deputies to the beginning of the zoning dispute. The AG's office called Beverly 3 days later. Here's what I didn't know at the time. There were 2 other families. A retired schoolteacher on Oak Mill Road whose garage had been cited for code violations 4 times in 18 months. Violations that mysteriously stopped once she agreed to sell a strip of her backyard to an adjacent property that turned out to be owned by a Spurgeon LLC, and an elderly man on the same block as my mother whose property taxes had been reassessed upward twice in 1 year, pressuring him toward a cash offer he'd eventually accepted. Beverly found both of them. Both of them talked to investigators. The TBI moved faster than I expected. Fitch and Harlan were placed on administrative leave with pay, which made me furious until Beverly reminded me it was procedurally necessary and temporary, within 2 weeks of the investigation opening. Spurgeon's nonprofit had its county contract suspended pending review. The sheriff, a man named Whitaker, who I'd voted for 3 years ago without thinking much about it, gave a statement to the local paper saying he was cooperating fully and deeply troubled by the allegations. Beverly read me the quote over the phone and said, dryly, he should be. My mother came back to the salon 6 weeks after her injury. Her wrist was still in a brace. She did consultations only for the first 2 weeks, sitting in the chair by the window instead of standing at the station, letting her girls handle the work. I helped her open the shop those first mornings, drove her there at 7, carried her supply bag. One morning, one of her regulars came in, a woman in her 70s who'd been getting her hair done by my mother for 15 years. And she grabbed my mother's good hand and just held it for a while without saying anything. My mother held on back. I went and stood in the supply room and took a couple of breaths. On the way home that evening, my mother said Mrs. Petworth gave her statement to the investigators. I know. Beverly told me. She said she saw the whole thing from her porch. She'd been watching because she thought it was strange, the police coming at that hour. She was quiet for a moment. She's 83 years old, Cody. She walked over to Mercy General by herself the next morning to check on me. I didn't even know she'd come. I kept my eyes on the road. People surprise you, my mother said. Yeah, not always in bad ways. The criminal indictments came down 4 months after I got that 214 call. Deputy Fitch was indicted on felony assault under color of law, conspiracy, and civil rights deprivation. Deputy Harlan on the same charges, with an additional count related to filing a false incident report. He'd written in his report that my mother had aggressively resisted and that force had been necessary and minimal. Beverly said that in light of 26 minutes of video evidence, the DA had found this creative interpretation of events unpersuasive. Spurgeon was indicted separately: wire fraud, abuse of public trust, conspiracy to commit property fraud. His nonprofit was dissolved by court order. The civil suit was settled 8 months later. Beverly negotiated. The county, without admitting wrongdoing. They never admit wrongdoing, she explained. That's just how it works. Agreed to a settlement that included the return of every piece of property that had been obtained through the redevelopment scheme, monetary damages for all 3 affected families, and a mandated independent review of the Sheriff's Department's conduct procedures. My mother's parking lot stayed my mother's parking lot. I was back at post when Beverly called to tell me the settlement was signed. I stepped outside the barracks into the November cold, and she walked me through the terms, and when she was done, I stood there for a minute looking at nothing in particular. How is your mother doing? Beverly asked. Good. Wrist healed. She's back on her feet. Tell her she handled herself with remarkable grace throughout this. She'd say that's just how she was raised. Beverly made a small sound that might have been a laugh. Maybe so, but a lot of people wouldn't have kept that tablet where it was. She said she just forgot to move it. Applause. Sometimes the best evidence is accidental. Fitch pleaded guilty 8 months into his criminal case and accepted a sentence that included 30 months in federal prison and permanent termination from law enforcement. Harlan took it to trial. The jury took less than 4 hours. I found out about Fitch's plea from a news alert on my phone at 6 in the morning. I was on the treadmill. I read it twice, stepped off, went and sat on a bench in the corner of the gym. I didn't feel triumphant exactly. I'm not sure what I felt. Something quieter than that. Like when a sound you've been hearing so long you stop noticing it finally stops, and the silence is almost loud. I called my mother. She answered on the third ring, and I could hear the salon in the background. A hairdryer, someone talking, the little bell above the door. Normal Wednesday morning sounds. "I saw," she said before I could speak. "How are you?" "I'm doing Mrs. Patterson's highlights. Hold on." A muffled sound, her saying something to someone in the shop. Then, "Okay, I'm here." "Are you okay?" She thought about it for a second. Real thought, not the reflexive kind. "I think so," she said. "It doesn't feel the way I thought it would." "No. I thought I'd feel angrier. Or, I don't know, more satisfied maybe." She paused. "Mostly, I just feel tired. And glad it's over. And glad you didn't do anything stupid." I laughed a little for the first time in a while. "I came close." "I know you did." Her voice was level. "But you didn't." "No. That's what matters." Another pause. Another pause. "Come home for Thanksgiving." "Yes, ma'am." "Drive the speed limit." "I'll try." My sergeant called me into his office the week after Fitch's plea. He'd been following the case, not because I told him much, but because he was Kowalski and he followed things. He sat me down, poured 2 cups of coffee from the worst machine in the United States Army, and slid one across the desk. "How's your mother?" "Good, sir. Back to full capacity." He nodded, drank his coffee. Let the quiet sit for a moment. "The attorney. She did good work. She did. And the contact at the AG's office. That worked out. It did." He looked at me with that flat, calibrated look he had. "You didn't go anywhere near those deputies." "No, sir." Something shifted slightly in his expression. Not a smile, exactly. More like a technical confirmation. "Good," he said. "Dismissed." I've thought a lot about what my mother said. That she felt tired more than anything. That the satisfaction wasn't the shape she'd expected. I think justice usually isn't. You spend so long building toward it that you imagine it'll arrive like something cinematic, a big moment, clean and final, a line that gets crossed and then everything's different. But it doesn't work that way. It comes in stages, a form filed, a call returned, a forensic copy made, an investigator who answers his email. A 75-year-old woman walking across the street at 7 in the morning to sit in a hospital room. It's quieter than anger. It's slower than rage. And it requires you to be willing to do it the long way. Even when the short way is sitting right there in the dark, waiting. I drove past that parking lot last Thanksgiving, on my way to pick up my mother for dinner. The lot was empty, late November, bare trees. There was a small wooden sign she'd put up by the entrance. New, cedar. Her handwriting burned into it with one of those craft kits she'd bought herself during the pandemic. It just said, "Hargrove Family Lot. Est, 1997. I sat there for a second in the car, engine running, looking at it. Then I drove to pick up my mother. People ask me sometimes if I regret not doing it the fast way. Not going to Fitch's apartment that night. Not making it simple and physical and immediate. And I always have to sit with that for a second before I answer. Because the honest answer is, for about 4 minutes, sitting in that parking lot at 11 at night, I didn't regret it yet. I was considering it. What stopped me wasn't fear. It wasn't even discipline, exactly. Though the army had a lot to do with it. What stopped me was something my mother said when I was maybe 12 years old after a kid at school had done something genuinely cruel to me, and I'd come home with blood on my shirt from not walking away. She sat me down at the kitchen table and said, "Baby, stupid people are counting on you to be stupid back. Don't give them the satisfaction." I didn't fully understand it then. I thought she was telling me to be weak. I understand it now. Fitch and Harlan were counting on me to be stupid. They'd called my mother's property a zoning issue, then escalated it into a physical confrontation, and somewhere in that calculation was the assumption that if it ever went sideways, the soldier's son would show up hot and make himself the problem. That's a story they knew how to tell. That's a story that ends with me in handcuffs and them walking. The tablet changed everything. Not because evidence is magic, it isn't, and plenty of people have clear evidence and still don't get justice, and I know that, but because it gave Beverly something to build with. And Beverly was the kind of person who knew how to build in a way that didn't leave gaps. Every document she filed, every public records request, every connection she drew between Spurgeon and those 2 deputies, that was architecture. Patient, precise, load-bearing. I think about that when I think about what intelligence actually means in a hard situation. It's not about being the smartest person in the room. It's about knowing what you don't know and finding the people who know it, and then getting out of their way. Kowalski knew Beverly's name. Beverly knew the AG contact. The AG contact knew the TBI. None of them were related to each other, and all of them moved in a chain that started with one decision I made at 02:30 in the morning to knock on my sergeant's door instead of drive home alone and make it worse. The hardest part of the whole thing wasn't waiting. It wasn't even watching my mother tape her ribs every morning and pretend she wasn't in pain. The hardest part was accepting that doing it right was going to feel inadequate for a long time before it felt like anything else. Rage has a momentum to it. It wants to move fast. Doing it right is slow and quiet and requires you to keep showing up in small ways. Driving my mother to the salon, carrying her supply bag, sitting in the supply room for 2 minutes when you need to, while the bigger machinery turns at its own pace. What I know now is that character isn't one decision. It's the accumulation of small ones made when nobody's watching and nothing feels resolved. The night I drove away from that parking lot. The morning I made the forensic copy before I did anything else. Every hour I waited for Beverly to call back instead of doing something I couldn't take back. My mother has a sign on her parking lot now. Cedar. Her own handwriting. She didn't put it up as a statement or a monument. She put it up because it's her lot and she wanted people to know it. That's all. That quiet certainty, that's what they couldn't take from her. And in the end, that's what undid them.